see, it's usual for me to think of you as Maestro because you've been working in Italy for the past several summers with students teaching storytelling. So it's a privilege and a pleasure to be here with all kinds of students. I think we're all students at a certain point when it comes to storytelling, looking behind the scenes and wondering why these great stories engage our imagination and reach us where it matters most in the heart. So it's great to have a conversation with you about your teaching and your maestro-ness. If we think about past, present, and future, you're kind of like the multiverse that they'll be talking about a little later on.
That's correct.
But
Yes.
I know you very well, as we've taught together, so I have an advantage that way. But for the members of the audience here today, I thought we should start by giving them a little bit of sense of how you came to documentary storytelling, what background you had, and if it was something that you were looking to get involved in, or if there was a little bit of destiny maybe in your journey. And so I think we should start there. Can you tell us a little bit about how you came to documentary storytelling?
By complete chance is how I came to it. I went to Kent State University in Ohio. I received a journalism degree, and I was a newspaper reporter for several years, first in Washington, D.C., and then in Los Angeles. And I was a reporter in L.A. during the 90s when L.A. was a go-go time for journalists. I covered everything from the Menendez trial to the O.J. Simpson trial, the Northridge earthquake, the 92 riots. It went on and on and on, and I just wound up burning out on journalism, which I never thought I would do. And during the O.J. trial, I became good friends with an NPR reporter, and I told her, well, it comes out of a good deed. She was teaching kids at a church in inner city LA how to write plays, and she asked me if I would help. And I said, I don't know anything about playwriting. And she said, Tom, they're 8 years old. So I agreed, and one of our field trips was we took the kids down to the LA County Main Museum, or library downtown. And it was there I can go to the spot where my life changed, where I said, you know, I'm just so fried on journalism. I don't know that I can do this anymore. And I'd covered everything I'd ever dreamed of covering. And she said, well, I know this guy who has a production company, and he needs a script written for Discovery Channel. And he asked me to do it, but I can't. Maybe you'd like to do it. He asked her to do it because she was an electronic reporter, as we used to call them, and not a print reporter. And so she put me in touch with him, and it's funny that Princess Bride, Robin Wright, was here earlier because he didn't want to hire me because I'd never written for television. And every day it was like the line from The Princess Bride, where, well done today, Tom. We'll probably have to fire you tomorrow. And they never did. And I was able to write very fast because I was a breaking news journalist. I'd been nominated for a Pulitzer Prize in investigative reporting. And it just came very easy to me. And they said, wow, this is great. Can you do this again? So from the late 90s into the 2000s, I became like the guy in Los Angeles that could write documentary scripts really fast and put out fires. And that's what I did for a long time until I started my own company in 2004. So having a journalism background was great as far as storytelling goes. But as far as filmmaking goes and visual storytelling, I had to learn that from film crews. And I asked a lot of questions and was like, why do you do this? What's three-point lighting? How do you set up an interview? And I just asked questions and asked questions. And I just was like a sponge. I loved it. And since 2004, we've been going strong.
Did you see yourself as a storyteller while you were in journalism, in terms of the writing, in terms of the engaging with people that you were interviewing? Had you ever thought of yourself as a storyteller in that context?
I consider myself more of a craftsman at the time. Like I knew a good story when I would see it. You know, and I was curious about the world. I would want to know more and more and more about the world, and things that seemed out of place sparked my curiosity. You know, one of the things that I kind of turned LA upside down one day was my editor said, "Well, it's a slow news day. Go out and find a story." And that's the hardest assignment you'll ever get, because you know, what am I looking for? Find a story. And I was driving around the west side of Los Angeles, and a few months prior, Venice Boulevard had been completely paved in this beautiful blacktop, and everyone was thrilled because it had been so beat up prior to that. And I always call it my look left story, because what happened was I was at a stoplight at Venice Boulevard crossing it, and I looked to the left just for an instant, and I saw these huge earth movers tearing up Venice Boulevard, cutting a big line down the middle, and putting in these massive sewage pipes, you know, like it's half the size of this room. And, you know, if I wasn't curious, I would have just kept driving. And I was like, why are they tearing up Venice Boulevard? They just paved it. Kind of made me mad as a resident of the city. So I parked my car and I went up and I talked to one of the workers. I said, "You guys just paved this thing." He goes, "Oh no, we didn't just pave it. The streets department just paved it." Well, and I said, "Well, why are you tearing it up?" He said, "Because our department and the streets department don't talk to each other." And I wound up going down to the Hall of Records at City Hall in Los Angeles. And I started doing research, and I found out somewhere between 30 and 40% of all roads that are paved in the city of Los Angeles at that time, within 1 year, were torn up by another streets department. And I wound up interviewing engineers for road stability, and they said, you know, it's like a sandwich, you know, and we build these levels, and if you cut it down the middle, the sandwich will never be the same. And I wrote this story, and because it was so ridiculous that these two departments did not compare notes. A couple of people lost their jobs, rightly so, because they just kept letting this stuff go through. And we're talking about almost hundreds of millions of dollars every year. And so because I looked left and I decided to stop, I changed the way the city did business. And it's the same with documentaries, you know, look left. You never know what's there, and be curious about it.
I've heard you talk about curiosity a number of times. And I think, you know, for some members of the audience, the question of, am I a storyteller? And then if I am a storyteller, but I'm struggling to find an idea, what do I do? And so hearing your experience of, well, go find a story somewhere else in the city, I think that really resonates with a lot of us. And in thinking through curiosity and in thinking through the skill sets that you had as a journalist, I've heard you also speak about how good storytellers are good story listeners. Can you talk about maybe an experience you had in journalism where you were interviewing someone or talking to an individual where you learned some things that have become crossover talents now in your work in documentary filmmaking?
Yeah, I learned both as a reporter early on, and then doing docs, that when you interview people, and they can be the heart and soul of whatever story you're telling, you need to shut up. You need to let them talk. So many times, especially on camera, when you're talking to someone who's gone through a particularly traumatic situation, they will start talking, and then there'll be a pause at a particularly difficult moment. And the natural human instinct that we all have is to fill the void of silence. Don't do it. Because the next thing they say, that will be the thing that will be the standout line in your show or your article. It is the most uncomfortable moment you can experience. But when it happens, they then will take the lead, say, I'm going to fill this silence. And it'll be that one extra thought that you realize, wow, I'm so glad I got my mouth shut. It's a remarkable thing, and it's one of the hardest things you'll do in interviewing people, is to try and draw them out. And the best way to draw them out is to be quiet.
And you're talking about a skill set of emotional intelligence, ultimately, as you're there trying to navigate what are very difficult conversations with a lot of individuals who suffered loss or trauma, or who have never been interviewed before in any
Correct.
way, or who have sensitive information that they're sharing for the first time.
Correct.
So that experience in journalism seems like it was formative for you in then being able to think about storytelling more broadly, but also deal with the mechanics of the individuals that have to be a part of the team to tell a story.
All true. I mean, in documentaries, it's much more, well, there's a lot of factors at play. It's much more of a team effort with the crew, but also then the people who are participating in your documentary. So you have to keep that in mind. When I was a reporter, it was just me and a photographer, and the difference also is when I was a newspaper reporter, I would pitch to the editors whatever I thought was the news of the day. This is important. People should know. Now it's like, I find important stories or stories that I really believe in, but will it fit the marketplace? Will someone buy it? Will someone pay for it? And that's anybody's guess anymore. It's all over the map now. No one has a crystal ball, and then you throw in artificial intelligence on top of that, and all bets are off. Who knows? You've got YouTube and TikTok. I mean, there's a joke in Los Angeles that 6 minutes is the new half hour. And what they mean is the attention spans are completely gone.
Well, not for us today. We have an hour and a half to talk about. So I understand you have a little bit, by way of a segue, of a didactic exercise for us. Your career has spanned so a lot of different subject areas.
Yes.
You've done things on aliens. You've done things on giants. You've done things on assassinations. You've done things on sports and a variety of personal interest stories and true crime, of course. But I hear that you've got some things you'd like to show us today from projects that you've had in the works for a while.
Yes.
By way of engaging some of the audience members that we have here today. Do you want to talk about what you've got coming up for us?
It's a little exercise that I like to do, and some of the students here have already experienced it. But I have what we call sizzle reels. And sizzle reels are just like a movie trailer of ideas that we put together because we think a network may be interested. And I have 3 of them with me today, and only one of them has sold. So I'm curious if after we show the 3 of these things, if anyone can figure out which one sold and why. And frankly, I believe they all should have sold by now. And I think they will eventually, but I can't get some of them over the top. So it's a fun exercise. And one other thing I'd like to add about kind of serendipity, and since we use a lot of archive to tell stories, which you'll see very soon here, is that that first script I wrote was about the Kennedy assassination for Discovery Channel, and I wound up working, and some of you may have heard this before, I wound up working with a museum in Dallas called the 6th Floor Museum, which is on the 6th floor of the school book depository from where Lee Harvey Oswald shot the president. And the curator there had gathered over many years all of the raw footage from the television and radio stations in Dallas These are the local people that you've never seen unless you were living in Dallas. It's not Walter Cronkite. There's hundreds and hundreds of hours. And in screening this footage with him for my first show, I said to this guy, Gary was his name, Gary, you could just let this stuff play. And he goes, oh, I know, but nobody's ever done it. And I said, well, I'm going to be the first one. And it took me somewhere between 12 and 14 years. And I finally convinced National Geographic Channel to do this format that has become very successful for us, which is there's no narrator, there are no modern day interviews. We just use archive to tell a story as if the archive was shot on purpose for us to create a feature film. For years and years and years, networks would say, it's impossible, you can't do that. There's no context. No one will understand what you're doing. And it's because they never tried. So I wound up cutting a 10-minute piece of the JFK film. That convinced National Geographic to do it. We did a 2-hour film. It was nominated for an Emmy. And since that day, we've made 42 more of those types of films. We won a Peabody for one about the assassination of Martin Luther King. We won an Emmy about the Challenger disaster. And when you watch these things, you know, I often joke that the audience is waiting for the narrator to come and save them. And the narrator never shows up. But once you get the format, the whole point of the format is to push our view of the world back in time, like it's a time machine. And you're transported there, and we try and create a world that's as close to what it was like to be alive at that time. So that's why I say all that as a you know, kind of a period at the end of the sentence about how you never know where this stuff is going to come from. So here are 3 short sizzle reels that we have put together. One of them has sold and been produced. The other 2 have not. And so for the handful of students in here who have perhaps experienced this exercise,
Be quiet.
keep it to yourself.
Just by way of a clarification, when you're making a sizzle reel, this is your opportunity to try and interest a network or a buyer in continuing the production on a piece. So you've invested a lot of time and energy and effort into sourcing the story and working with a team and putting together a reel, just to make sure everybody understands the way that.
Yeah, it's meant as a hook. You know, we have found something, we've discovered something, we created a clever idea. Oftentimes networks won't read pitch decks anymore. They just want to just show me 3 minutes. What's it about? If I like the idea, then we can talk. And that's how it works. So sometimes we put a lot of resources into things. Other times we put not so much, and because we found something really cool and we think, hey, if we just get this idea in front of wherever, they're going to want to run with it with us. And so it's kind of all over the map. You can spend a lot of time in development and time and money and resources and staff time, and they won't be interested. You could do something with an editor over 2 days where you feel like, oh, I'm just slapping this thing together, and it's like it sells in a day. And again, you just never know. And I've had, by the way, the reason why I think the other 2 will sell is because invariably, I love our ideas and where they come from and why. Invariably, 6 months will go by and I'll get an email or a phone call and say, hey, do you still have that thing that you pitched me 6 months ago? And I'm like, you mean the thing that you said absolutely no, never to?
Under no circumstances.
I was like, yeah, I still got it. We want to do that now. And fine.
Well, that's the other great thing. I've heard you encouraging students by saying, keep the ideas coming. That you're not a one-idea person. You're not a one-idea storyteller. No. And the necessity to have many different ideas across a lot of different genres so that you can have the variety and have the hope to sell and interest someone
Yeah,
in purchasing your
in
work.
this business or any kind of storytelling business, if you have one or two ideas, you're not going to go far. You just won't. You have to have 1,000. You know, you have to keep them coming. That's why curiosity is so great. I mean, we just have like a file of even sentences. What about this? What about that? I saw this. That could be something. I stumbled across this piece of archive. That could be something. You know, you just got to track them and track who's buying what and why, and then get them in front of the right people. So it's like 3-level chess. You know, it's all over the place. But if you're willing to play, you might win.
Well, on that note, shall we sizzle?
Shall we sizzle? Okay. I don't know if I should. Perhaps I'll just play them and then we could talk about them, or we'll talk about each one after. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Let's see.
Let's see if the
Do I hit it twice?
try.
Bobby Riggs plays Mrs. Billie Jean King on a tennis court in Houston tonight. His match is being billed as an epic battle of the sexes.
Because of the HIV virus that I have attained, I will have to retire from the Lakers.
Rugby was always the Afrikaner sport, divisive, a symbol of apartheid. But to Mandela, the Rugby World Cup final in Joburg was an opportunity.
Everybody's cheering him on, including the best skateboarders in the world.
You didn't have to be a skateboarder to appreciate what went down that night.
I don't know what it was like for Billie Jean King to play Bobby Riggs, but being the hero that she is, you know, she stood up for us. She stood up for women's sports and just women in general.
Magic, you're the most valuable player. The moment is yours. Congratulations.
I would like to thank the players that decided that everything would be all right if they played with me and against me.
Indians now have a man past first base. And the ground ball is short. Bellardi. He did it.
You talk to any South African today and they will remember exactly where they were when that game took place.
Storyteller is cheering along with the whole of the stadium.
Because it was much, much more than a game.
I realized that I have no sleeves, so you can see the goosebumps. I've even seen this before, so fantastic.
Thanks. Yeah, we like this one. We came up with this in a development meeting with my development team. You know, we look at, okay, what's trending? But then we try and throw the trends out the window, because by the time you chase a trend, the trend's over. You can't get into production and delivery and be part of a trend. You have to recognize where the trend is and where it's going. And at that time, we thought, you know, sports are always going to sell. Now, granted, the footage is not cheap, but sports will always sell. But we wanted to do something kind of with a global point of view, but beyond how people would think about sports. And so it started with Mandela, you know, the idea of the games in '94, the Rugby World Cup. And we realized how that was, a seismic shift in a way for the world to witness. And then we started identifying other moments in sports that captivated the world beyond how the world saw it as a game, and perhaps something bigger that we all could be a part of or witness to. So that was the idea behind that one. That's where we thought, what can we do with sports that people haven't done before? So that was the motivation behind that idea.
Fantastic. Keep sizzling.
Okay, keep sizzling. I think
There'll be a quiz at the end of this.
Yes, I think the next one is true crime, because everybody wants true crime, so we looked for a new way in. Yeah. We borrowed some old movie clips for this one.
What was the feeling walking into a bank with a loaded gun, knowing you were going to rob?
You say, I'm going to own this bank, this is going to be my bank for a while. I'll own it and everybody will be working for me.
When I asked him, did you do it because of the money? He said, no. I did it because I love tricking and fooling the FBI. It became a game with me.
When you go in there, your personality changes. You're just acting is what you're doing. It's like a football player putting on his clothes, or a rodeo rider putting on his spurs. You get ready to go in the game. I talked quite a bit too, they said that I talked too much. Some people get really scared, and one old fella started, like that, and I said, I'm gonna have a heart attack, and what you try to do is talk to them and get them calmed down, and I said, the police gonna catch me 50 miles down the road anyway.
I was really shocked to find out my mother was involved. One of my dad's best friends and his wife, when I told him I was shocked, he goes, well, she was his right-hand man. She was a big part of the planning. After that moment, I felt driven to tell my father's story. I felt like I had lost my mind. Like, Susan, what are you doing? You wanted to tell your dad's story, but you had no idea how it was going to affect you. I get emotional just talking about it. I'm sorry. I need a minute.
They thought they were going to kill him. That's the reason he changed cars all the time. And they probably would have if they just had the slightest excuse.
There was something about my dad that people couldn't resist. You want to be with him. You want to experience the excitement that he experiences. And that is very powerful.
My dad said, you're good at robbing banks because you love it so much.
I always had a hard time understanding. I'm like, Dad, why didn't you stop? And he said, I couldn't. They were going to have to catch me or kill me.
So, what's a little background on that? How did you?
A producer friend of ours company brought this story to us. The daughter had written a book about her. I'd never heard of this particular bank robber, but when you find out that this bank robber robbed more banks than Bonnie and Clyde and some of the famous bank robbers of the 30s, I wanted to know more. And then the fact that long ago she had set up a VHS camera and interviewed her father about what it was like to rob banks. I was like, well, this is a tremendous resource. I like this way in. He never killed anyone, but he robbed a lot of banks. And even more intriguing is that his wife and his brother and all these family members were all in on this crime spree that was going on, and they never got caught. And then by the time he fessed up to it, he could fess up to it because the statute of limitations had run out on bank robberies. So the one thing we don't let on is how much money he made, which was quite a bit, actually, for the time period. So I found it fascinating. Everyone wants true crime. If you have a great true crime story, your odds of selling it anywhere to a streamer or a network go up 50%. That's what sells, because that's what the audience is watching and buying. And they have for a long time, but it seems like hyperactive right now. I mean, look at Netflix. They're putting out true crime every week, and so this is one that fascinated me, and I believed would be one that would captivate audiences. And again, we shot the interview with her. We used some of her archive. We put it together. We could have done more, but we thought what's there now is enough to push it over the top, and that's what we did.
Excellent. Very good. Okay, we have one more, right?
One more.
Okay.
This is an archive story that, well, you'll see what it is, and then we'll talk about it. Okay.
From?
Good choice. Because we use so much archive in storytelling, we're always curious about what we might find while we're looking for other things to do our films. And we've been fascinated for many years about, one of my researchers many years ago started discovering recordings that were made in the 1930s and 1940s of Titanic survivors, audio recordings. And, we don't think of people from 1912 telling us in first person what was going on in 1912. We just don't think about that. We think, oh, well, there's no recorded sound in 1912, which is correct. But there was after 1930, and those people were still around. And amazingly, a lot of these recordings are in fantastic shape. Yeah, we did a little cleaning on them, but since then we've found about 100 survivors who were on the ship who tell their stories. And I find that fascinating that we can, the oldest one we found is in the Library of Congress. I've been trying for years to sell a series that pushes the needle of time as we understand it, as far as storytelling, as far back as possible. Like I remember in Los Angeles many years ago, there was the negative of the first image ever taken, which I believe was in a French farmhouse in like 1839. And you had to walk into this darkened room, and they had it down this like ramp at one of the museums in Los Angeles in order for your eyes to adjust to the darkness to the point where you could actually see the first image ever taken on planet Earth. And I found that it took like 20 minutes before you could get to the actual image. But then you could see this is what it was like that long ago. And for me to hear these stories from something like 1912, I find fascinating because it does transport you back. The oldest story we have found was a guy who was a page boy at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C., the night that Abraham Lincoln was shot. And in 1933, he made a recording, first person, talking about, he was very old at that point, but he talks about how Lincoln was shot, how Booth ran by him and all the other pages who were at the theater that night. And so you have this first person account, not a diary, not a book, not an actor reading someone else's words. You have the person who was there telling you what it was like. And we have found so many great stories when people started to make audio tapes. And oftentimes the networks get very nervous about history and archive, but they keep hiring. You know, if we have the right story, they'll buy it right away. So we've collected about 100 of these Titanic survivors over the years, and they're quite compelling.
That's a little bit of a passion project for you, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
Titanic.
Yeah.
Why is that?
My grandmother missed the boat.
That would do it.
I'm Irish of descent, and she had a ticket to the Titanic, and she was 2 days late getting to Belfast, where it launched in Ireland from. So she came over on the Olympic instead, which was the Titanic's sister ship. What else was there? There was something else.
I don't know. Is there a night to remember?
A Night to Remember. Well, we borrowed some clips from the old black and white. Yeah, when I was a kid, and so many of the things that I've done professionally have come from some fascination as a child. Thank you for reminding me of that. Mm-hmm. When I was in the second grade at my school in Cleveland, Ohio, I took out a book called A Night to Remember, which was written by an author named Walter Lord. And it's considered the definitive story of the Titanic. It was published in the 1950s. It was turned into a film. The British made a film out of it, which is great. There's no Jack and Rose in it. You know, it's just the real story. And I was fascinated. I would take the book out, I'd read it. The book would come due at the school library. I'd go back in, I'd renew it. I renewed it for the entire school year and just kept reading it and reading it and reading it. And on the last day of school, the librarian called me to the library, and I thought, oh God, am I in trouble? Because I had returned the book and I didn't want to. And she said, I've never had a student take out a book this many times in a row. I want you to have it. She gifted me that book, and now I've gifted it to my 2 young sons, and so they will be stewards of the book from when I was in the second grade learning about the Titanic. Yeah. I don't know where it came from. I read the book once, it fascinated me, and then I couldn't get enough.
Well, all 3 of these sizzle reels demonstrate your curiosity at work and the teamwork involved in a source. It must feel pretty special to also have one of them be a passion project based on a childhood encounter with an idea. And so that when I've heard you talk about writing, you came into this as a writer.
Correct.
A lot of there's that saying, I guess you'd call it, to write what you know.
Correct.
And that's a good place to start with a lot of things.
Right.
So that's unique to have that. All right, so...
Well, I'd like, before we guess which one, maybe start with the first one, sports in the moment. I mean, do you have any thoughts on that? Would you be interested in that? If so, why? What did you see that you liked or didn't like? Go ahead. Thanks, Joanna.
Sorry, you caught me. I was not on
Sorry. We wanted to get the students involved.
I was saying how sports is always going to be something that's always going to be relevant and always going to be mainstream. Even if you're someone that doesn't watch a lot of sports, as me, I don't watch any, but I could connect with the clips and that moment, the feeling of gratification of realizing you just accomplished something big. And like you said, you can't always go and try to find the next trend. But I think sports will never be a trend. It'll always be a statement piece because it's always going to be relevant.
And it's like music. It's kind of a universal language. So, you know, you win, you lose. The rules are the same wherever you go. So, yeah, that was... you know, we were looking for a big picture way in, and so that is true. So, anyone else thoughts about the moment in sports that changed the world?
Yeah.
Yes.
Go around. We have time for questions, so make the most of it.
Absolutely.
An amazing compilation of clips. I'm just wondering, where's your through line? How do you connect these?
What was the last thing?
How do you connect these all?
how do I connect them as far as how we tell stories? I mean, my interest is vast as far as different types of stories to tell. And I'm always looking for, again, these are just meant to be teaser sizzle reels to get somebody that we know at a network or streamer hooked enough to start asking questions. I mean, we could have developed these out much more. We could have done a 10-minute sample of the film, but you know, this starts to add up. And if you're pitching, you know, anywhere from 30 to 50 ideas a year, and we are having to do these for each one of them, and we do these on spec. You know, in the old days, I could call the History Channel and just give them a paragraph, and they'd be like, "Oh yeah, let's do that," because at that time, when I lucked into this business, none of the networks had any content. You know, they sent me around the world to places I never dreamed I would go, but one of which was Easter Island, you know, with the Moais in the South Pacific. Who goes to Easter Island, you know? And I've been there twice. And the reason I went there the first time is because the production company where I was a writer and then became a producer said, "How about Easter Island?" That was the pitch.
Things have changed a little.
Things have completely changed. How about Easter Island? And they said, sure, because they had nothing on Easter Island. It didn't exist. We talk about swimming in content today. There was no content 20 to 25 years ago. It didn't exist. That would be a pitch. I went to French Guiana, you know, which was Devil's Island. The French prisons, excusez-moi, but where the French would send their prisoners. I went there twice. I went for a Devil's Island show, and then there's a famous story about a guy, not Emile Zola, he was the writer, Dreyfus, Alfred Dreyfus, called the Dreyfus Affair. It's a very long story. It's fascinating if you look it up. And he was held on this one little rock and watched by a guard 24 hours a day. So I went there for that. And it's like the pitch was, how about the Dreyfus Affair? What's the Dreyfus Affair? Well, let me tell you, here's a paragraph. Wow, that's a great idea. Let's do that one. Now, if I said, how about Easter Island? They'd be like, we have 25 films on Easter Island. What's new? Why now? How are you advancing the story? So the bar is much higher than it used to be. We could just throw out ideas of, I always wanted to do something like that. It was very easy to get a commission back then.
You've also had the opposite problem, though. You try to do something new in shipwrecks, and then what's the response that you get?
Yeah. One thing about the Titanic reel, to jump ahead to that, there's you know, I'm fascinated by the sea and certainly shipwrecks, and there's a great shipwreck story about a ship called the Monte-Carlo, which burned off the coast of New Jersey in the mid-1930s. It was this party boat that would go from New York City to Havana, Cuba. You know, and people would get on this ship and they'd, you know, have a great time, and then they'd stay in Havana for a couple of days, and the ship would come back. And at the time, it was, you know, people thought maybe it's running guns for the Cuban revolutionaries. All kinds of strange things about the ship. But on its way back to New York, it mysteriously caught on fire. And hundreds of people were killed in this fire. And it happened 8 miles off the coast of New Jersey. It wound up, this charred hulk wound up beaching itself in Atlantic City. And it sat there for 6 months and became like a tourist attraction. There's footage from airplanes that followed the burning ship as it drifted to shore. There are still images like you wouldn't believe of lifeguards pulling people out of the surf who swam the 8 miles or died swimming them. It was like you have everything, and you have the mystery, who burned the Monte-Carlo. And I was pitching it at a network that I thought would be interested in it. And I was a minute in and showing them all this stuff, and they said, Tom, if you're going to pitch me a shipwreck, it has to be the Titanic.
So wait, let me get this straight. We have so many Easter Island things, we don't need another of the same. But then on the opposite end of the spectrum, don't try and tell us something new, because if it's not the same thing, then we can't buy it.
No, because, you know, what they want is something that people recognize right away. You know, they don't want to have to hook people in when you look at your little box on your DirecTV or whatever. It says, oh, Titanic, of course. Morro Castle, what's that? I don't know. You know, was that an episodic television series at one point? Man in the High Castle. So yeah, I mean, that's what they're looking for. You know, one thing I'll say about all of these, you know, when we talk to networks and streamers anymore, we have to keep in mind that we're talking to their marketing departments as much as their editorial departments, because they need to like sell it, you know, and they want to sell it. They want it to be successful, but they want to know that it's familiar enough but still set itself apart from everything else.
And that's a change with respect to what you had first encountered, that you're now functioning as a marketing, promotional vehicle, as well as the creative team behind the piece.
You have to think in those terms. Like, how are they marketing other things that they have coming out right now? How are they doing it? What do they want? I mean, we did a film on Diana, where I convinced the British author Andrew Morton a few years ago to surrender or let me use his tapes that Diana had secretly made for him to write his famous book in 1992. And he said he was never going to release them to anyone. And when I called him up, I said, wait, Andrew, before you hang up, you know, we do this completely differently. We do this with no narrator, no modern interviews. We only use media sources from the time, and we'll use Diana's recordings as if she is narrating her own film. And he said, no one has ever asked me to do it that way. When can you be in London? And I live in Los Angeles. I said, I'll be there tomorrow. And I went and went to his publisher's office, which was something out of Narnia, and I'm not kidding, you know, with the ivy. And I remember it was raining all day because I went into this small writer's office with Andrew, and we met and we talked, but there was a skylight there. And it just was raining all day. And he said, okay, are you ready? And I'm like, yeah, I'm ready. And he pushed play. And for the next 7 hours, it was like Diana was sitting right across from us telling us her life story. It was professionally one of the most extraordinary things that I've ever been a part of. And we made the deal, and then, but as far as marketing, so we have Diana, we have these secret tapes, but even still, there's a fascinating thing. If you're making a film that goes off on Netflix or or really anywhere, and they want to push it, they push it into local markets now in ways that you may not be familiar with. There are companies that I have to get up sometimes at 3 o'clock in the morning. I did with the Diana film. And there's a company in Phoenix that they hire out. And what they do is they book me on what's called a radio tour, and they also do this for television. And starting at like 3:30, they'll, in 10 to 15 minute increments, they'll have me booked from East Coast time to West Coast time for about the next 6 hours. And there'll be an operator out of Phoenix saying, oh, good morning, Tom. You know, and right now you're going to WGBH in Boston, you know, and you're talking to the morning zoo, and, you know, the hosts are so-and-so and so-and-so, and you go on there and you do like 5 to 7 minutes, and then they click off, and it goes back to Phoenix, and then the Phoenix guy, okay, Tom, now you're going down to Miami, and you're going to be on this show with this guy, and he's going to ask you X, Y, and Z, and then boom, you're on the air in Miami. And then you go up to Washington, D.C., and you start working your way across the time zones. they also have studios in Los Angeles where I, as the director, would have to go in, and I would have to sit there, tell the story in short segments for morning talk shows on television in local markets, because they're not relying on everyone to watch the Today Show or Good Morning America anymore, although they put me on that too. But they feel like there's an intimacy with the people that you would know as a viewer in your local hometown, where, oh my God, they're talking to the person that made that film. I should watch that because my favorite person on the morning talk show also likes that thing, whether they watched it or not. Anyway, what was your question?
You've more than answered. I think more than answered.
All right. The other one was the bank robber's daughter. Anyone have any thoughts on that? Go ahead.
Well, I have questions.
Yes,
in
go
general.
ahead.
Okay. So I've seen that all of the films are about something in the past. Why do you choose to talk about the past, and how it is important to you to talk about some events when they have already been explored? And also, how do you deal with archive? And especially in the Titanic, that I don't know, but I might think that there's not much archive. How would you do that movie, and how would you do that?
It's a very good question, and I'll tell you why in a minute. We have been very successful doing historical docs. I mean, I didn't plan on it that way, but I just kind of fell into it. And when networks and streamers want those kind of films to be on their air, we're one of the top companies that they call to do them. And I'm very happy to do them. I find it fascinating. And there's always something more, like these Titanic voices, for example. Watch any other Titanic documentary and tell me if you've ever heard recordings of people who were on the ship. It's not out there. It doesn't exist. The bank robber's daughter, we thought we wanted a different way in, so that worked. In the moment, the moment with sports is, again, looking at more modern sporting events and trying to explain how they captivated the world and why. There's a lot of, personal reasons why I like doing stories from the past. In some ways, I lost my mom when I was very, very young and didn't have any kind of photographs or images of her for a long, long time until I re-met my cousins 20 years later. It's a long story, but they had all this stuff. And so in a sense, and I connected with them, and my brother and two sisters did before I started doing documentaries. But I found myself trying to take this material and trying to rebuild this life up till age 8 in my life. Like, what was it like to be alive then? What was it like to have a mother? And by pursuing that, it kind of sparked something in me. And then when my first job was the Kennedy assassination, which also had fascinated me at the time, it seemed to be meant to be, path of least resistance. We've done other things that are more modern, or following people around, but I would say 90% of what we do is not necessarily all archive, but certainly stories from the past. But every time we do a story from the past, the mandate is find something new. I mean, the reason why I went to Andrew Morton is because Nat Geo asked me to do something for the 20th anniversary of Diana's passing. And oh, by the way, find something new. Do it in that style that you do that we like so much, that you just won an Emmy for. But find something new. And my first inclination is there's nothing new on Diana. Every frame has been gone over. But then I remembered, because I was a reporter when Andrew Morton's book came out, I remember Andrew's story. And Andrew's story is he wrote this book and everybody said he was a liar. He made it up. This wasn't true. The suicide attempts, the bulimia, the miserable marriage, he just made it up to sell books. And he kept his mouth shut. He never sold her out until after she died. And I remembered that story because when I went to journalism school, we were taught you go to jail before you reveal your sources. That's what we were taught. And he never gave her up. And he was hounded and pilloried, especially in the British press, until she passed. And then he put out a revised edition of the book, and he included some transcripts from the tapes. And it was like, by the way, my source was the story itself. It was Diana. And that was kind of my introduction to him. I said, you know, look, I was a reporter when you were writing the book, and I really respect you for what you did, how you handled all that. It at least broke the ice with him. So in having Nat Geo say, find something new, the only thing new I could think of is this guy has these tapes that no one has ever heard. And if I'm going to find something new, that would be new. And it was. And then Nat Geo wound up licensing it to Netflix. And it was licensed to Netflix right before season 4 of The Crown. And if you watched The Crown, they would, you know how they put, if you like The Crown, watch this. Well, they only put one other thing up during the entire season 4 of The Crown to watch, and it was Our Dog. And like 50 million people watched that documentary. And it was fascinating. So, like I said, it's the path of least resistance. It's something we all enjoy, and certainly if we can find a way to tell a story that people think they know in a new way, or shed new light on something.
Like the Heartland tapes. That was another challenge from a network.
Oh, God. Yeah. They wanted something new. This was for Smithsonian Channel. They wanted something on 9/11. And and images from the past can influence me and how I come up with ideas. People say, where do your ideas come from? We had just done something. It might have been the Kennedy assassination. But they asked me to find a new way to tell the 9/11 story, again, in this all-archive style. And I was like, man, you know, 9/11's like Diana. Every frame of footage, you know, what am I, you know, how many outtakes are there from CNN? And I remembered this photograph. It was taken in Chicago. It was in black and white, and it was like, it might have been the Kennedy assassination. And it was back in the day on the Miracle Mile in Chicago, where the department stores would have banks of televisions pointing out. And people would like stroll by and they'd look. And there was this one photograph, something, maybe it was the moon landing. I forget, but everyone was pressed up against the glass watching, maybe it was the moon landing. And I remembered that image because I don't know why. It was a very striking image. And in thinking about 9/11, that image came to my mind, the concept of on the outside looking in. Like all these people are on the street in Chicago and they're watching this magnificent event, whatever it was. And I got this idea from that image, well, let's forget about what was going on in Washington and New York and Pennsylvania. What was happening in the rest of the country? What was everybody else doing? And I pitched it as like, if I was a news director at a television station in Kansas City and 9/11 is happening, what am I doing? Well, I'm sending crews out to malls. I'm sending crews out to like gas stations or people panicking. I'm sending a crew out to the local military base. I'm just like, you start thinking, you start churning the ideas over and over and over in your head. And sure enough, we found the most remarkable stuff going on in the rest of the country, all the way up to Anchorage and Honolulu. I mean, we scoured the country and we found amazing material that just went on and on and on and on. And at one point I said, you know, if you really want to make this from the outside looking in, people are tired of seeing those towers come down. Let's not even show anything that was going on in New York or what. And they're like, Tom, you can't do that. You have to like at least acknowledge visually what was happening. But they did, I'll give them credit, because the footage from the Heartland was so good in all these different places, that instead of showing footage, we showed stills, and they allowed the stills to be in black and white. So it was acknowledging what was happening, but the whole point of the film was to focus on what everybody else was doing on the outside looking in. And that was a fun moment, you know, to come up with that because of a picture I saw from the moon landing.
Well, it's also part of your hallmark style, which I think responds a little bit to your question. It's a difficult response to the question because your storytelling style is not about commenting about the past from the present.
No.
It's about re-evoking the present of yesterday. So you've commented already on how you change the space-time continuum and that you're going back in history and you're living a moment from a different perspective. And so what's unique about many of the films that you've done, including the Heartland tapes, is that as a viewer experience, for those of you who've seen his films, you know, you do feel like you're living that moment in the first person and that it's happening. And you suspend that disbelief that you already know the ending. You've done the Challenger film. You've done the Diana film. These are films where people, they know the ending. They know JFK is assassinated.
Right.
And yet the emotional impact of the storytelling style that you have by bringing people back into that moment is that you tend to forget what the ending is because you're there living it in a way you hadn't experienced it before. So that's a unique way, I think, at least from my perspective of your storytelling style, of seeing how the past and the present combine. And so in the vein, all art is contemporary, I think that you've done a really great job of trying to re-center people in the past in a way that gets away from some of the tendencies that even historians might have to read the past through the lens of the present.
Right.
And so that type of authenticity in storytelling, I think, is a very compelling
and
way of telling a
these
story.
are not like what used to be called clip shows. You know, we're not just slamming a bunch of news clips together. We create the world from those time periods. We find characters that keep popping up throughout the visual storytelling. We find universal themes that become the foundation of the story we're telling. You know, this is not a bunch of archives slammed together. I mean, and like I said, we do other things, but it really is what we're known for, and I am proud of that. I suppose, you know, an example of how we approach a story with, you know, this huge amount of material and what are we going to do with it would be with Hans Zimmer, the composer, which was connected to the film that we had premiere here in 2019 called Apollo Missions to the Moon. Should I tell
Well,
that
do you
one?
want to tell them which of these won, or do you want to have them guess before you tell them that, before you explain the architecture of storytelling? What do you think?
No, I'll tell this story first.
That's the way to be a director.
And then we'll take our quiz. So, again, Nat Geo had asked me, we do a lot of work for National Geographic, and they had asked me to do a show about, for the Apollo anniversary. and everyone was doing Apollo 11 for the moon landing, the 60th. And so, but we came up with, well, what happened to the other Apollos? You know, 1 through 17. You know, there was some tragedy there. Apollo 1 astronauts, burned in the capsule. And 17, everyone had forgotten about Apollo, and they were onto the space shuttle. And how did that arc happen? And one of the things we did, and this is after my little schooling session with the famous composer Hans Zimmer, we started to build storylines. We talk about what's a story, So within all of this complex material, the astronauts, of course, are a thread. They, their story goes up and down. We follow them. Some of the astronauts are more prominent than others. The astronauts' families, if you see the film, it's like, how much were they going through? The wives and the children, they become a thread. So it's like you're looking at an Avid or Premiere line of video, but you're instead looking at story beats and story through lines. And each of those through lines has its own beginning, middle, and end, has its crescendos and falls. The spacecraft themselves, that became a through line, how they changed, how they failed. NASA, what was going on with them? The American public and their reaction to the space program. That becomes a story thread. So we had these, we must have had the American media at the time, the worldwide media, the race with the Russians. All of these become story points. And so we followed it chronologically, but we had so many story threads to follow that when one would start to trail off in the chronological telling, there was another one that was rising. And you could just see the beauty in how this came together. But it came together because of Hans Zimmer. Does everyone know who Hans Zimmer is? A famous composer. God bless him. We work a lot with his company. He's been very good to us. So we were doing this National Geographic film on Apollo, and he was in London. I was in London, visiting with, we do a lot of work with the London office of Disney and Nat Geo. And Hans was scoring some movie, not one of the big ones. He was at a studio in Soho. And he said, yeah, come by, I'll talk to you. He didn't score our films per se. He would write perhaps an intro theme or give notes, and he would oversee his team of composers that would actually do a lot of the heavy lifting. And he and I talked for a couple of hours. I mean, he took the whole afternoon. It was fascinating. He talked about creativity and where he gets his ideas from, talked about a master class. It's like every movement he would make seemed to be a creative act. It's like drinking a cup of coffee. I was like, wow, look at how he drinks that coffee. So finally he gets around to, so what's your film about? I said, well, it's about, Hans, everybody's doing, so I give Hans Zimmer the pitch. Everybody's doing Apollo 11, but we're going to be very clever about it. We're going to do all the Apollo missions, and how they did it. And I don't know, I won't do this with the emphasis he did, but we were at a table, and he slams his hand on the table. He goes, no. What is your film about? I'm like, Hans Zimmer's yelling at me. Not he wasn't attacking me, but he was like, what is your film about? I'm like, well, it's about the group of people that, this unbelievable odds that they could pull this thing off. Computers, we have more power in our phones. No! What is your film about? And I had had to say, Hans, I don't know what you're asking me. And he said, do you remember the moon landing? I'm old enough to remember. And I said, no. And he asked me why, and that's when my mother was dying. He said, do you remember anything about the Apollo? And I said, yeah, I remember Apollo 8, which was previous to that. A couple of reasons why. One of the astronauts was Jim Lovell, who was from Cleveland, Ohio, which is where I was a little kid at the time, who was also on Apollo 13, the one that almost didn't come back. So Cleveland was a buzz, and even though I wasn't following the news, you couldn't hide from it. My mom was not sick at the time, and Apollo 8 was doing this thing that's now known as the Christmas Eve broadcast. So Apollo 8 was huge because it was the first time a spacecraft had gone outside the gravitational pull of the Earth. It flew out to the moon, went around it several times, and then was coming back. And on its way back, the astronauts did this thing called the Christmas Eve broadcast. So it was everyone in the world was going to watch this thing. And so I'm telling Hans this is the one I remember because I went to this little corner store to get my mother, gave me $1 to buy candy or something. And it was bitter cold on Christmas Eve that night in Cleveland. And it was so cold that I can still remember the crunch of the snow under my feet on the sidewalk. Crunch, crunch, crunch. And so I'm telling Hans this, and I'm walking back to my house. This is when a 6-year-old can do that. And I said, I remember it because I remember looking up and the sky was cloudless and it was so bitter and I could see my breath and hear my feet. And I saw the moon, and then I looked down the street and I would see every living room had the TV on. My mother had said, make sure you come back for the astronauts, they're going to be on soon. And it was like everyone was waiting. It was like the campfires were lit in every house, waiting for these astronauts to come down from space. And I said, Hans, I kept looking up and I kept looking down. And then I thought, there are guys up there that are going to talk to me down here. And we so take that for granted today. That was never done. And I said, I kept doing this. As I was walking, I wanted to get home. I looked up, they're up there, and they're going to talk to me down here. And I kept doing this back and forth. And he said, what was that like for you? And I had to think for a second. I said, it was like magic. And he goes, that's what your film is about. Your film is about magic because it's a universal theme and magic plays anywhere in the world.
Turning point moment for you.
I'm forever grateful, Tim, for guiding me through it. He didn't tell me. He let me find my own universal theme. And so in all of these, we keep that story in mind. What is the universal theme behind it? And there's always something, and maybe 2 or 3. And whenever we would lose our way with this vast amount of material for the Apollo thing, I'd stop with the editor and say, it's about magic. And we'd find our way back home and telling the story.
Do you feel like talking about storytelling cycles?
Well, I think we could have our contest now.
Okay. Or Hero's Journey.
No, let's finish this so there's time for questions.
Very good. Well, command.
Okay.
You're the teacher.
Who has a guess of which one of those sizzles sold and why? Oh, come on.
Okay.
Hi, so I am Chid. I'm from Jasmine Studios, based out of London. before I watched the second and third, I was convinced that number one was the one. Then after number two and three, I don't know. But I'm going to stick with number one because from the comment earlier from the front, sports is universal. And there's a thing about, I remember watching the Champions League final with some friends one time. And it was literally one of these where we're too far from home, phoned a friend, are you guys watching by any chance? Can we drop by with a couple of us? We do. And the house is, full of his friends' mix of girls and who did not care for football at all. We're watching the game, we're enthused, right? And to bring the hook into it, two of my favorite teams are playing, right? So I kind of, Barcelona and Manchester United, and Barcelona killed us. But never mind. But the thing is, as we're watching the game, I suddenly thought, okay, let me make it interesting for the girls. And so I turned it into a soap opera. And I said, okay, so Gerard Piqué, who plays defense for Barcelona, he's actually dating Shakira. And suddenly, boom, they were invested, right? So with sports, you made a comment about marketing, which I find fascinating, because for me, sports is brilliant because it's universal. You get to see what people are like. The whole cycle of the human emotion, you get to see that within a framework of 2 hours. Are they a good person? Are they a bad person? What are they like under pressure? And even if you don't watch sports, it's that moment where, okay, I don't watch sports, but I'll buy into the final. And so from what you guys did with the World Cup, for example, so I didn't watch rugby union at the time, but I tuned into the final because, it's a tournament and Mandela's there and the Springboks, and you're thinking about all the other stuff that has to do with anything but sport and how that, kind of affects these heroes, male or female, who are about to go out and do combat. And so for that reason, I thought, yes, sports is going to be the winner.
Okay. Anyone else?
Come on, don't be shy. Who else wants to have a guess? Yes.
If you were running a network, which one would you buy and why?
From the perspective of what is the rage right now, if I was a network, I would go with the second one. Because as you've said, people love true crime documentaries to the point that they will sit down and just listen to it. They don't even have to view it. There's true crime podcast. They're enthralled with the mystery. And I feel like this one adds a new nuance because she lived with someone who was committing the crime. Right. She was seeing the behind the scene action. So she saw the process. And I think that's a story people want to know about, especially now.
Okay, couple more.
Okay, yeah, we have two more. Can we have two more?
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Hi, my name's Chi-Chi. I'm also from Jasmine Studios.
Hi.
Like my brother, I thought it was going to be sports because of obviously the universal themes, and then I saw the second one, True Crime, then I saw Titanic. As we've already previously discussed, Titanic always has everybody kind of interested, but I thought that the take that these were actual survivors, these weren't the construct of James Cameron, who did an amazing job in giving most of the world an idea of what it could have been like. But this is the first time we've actually heard from people who were really there. So I think if you are a Titanic enthusiast or a history enthusiast or just the emotion of what it is to live through such a monumental disaster, because everybody loves a survivor story, right? So I think for that reason, and for the fact that it is something that people can easily identify with, then it was probably Titanic.
Okay. One more, maybe?
Yeah. Yes, Lucy. Hi. I don't know which one was the winner, but what I wanted to say is that the second one, what I find interesting about that one, is that the fact that the daughter is there, it adds something emotional to the story, and maybe makes it like a bit more relatable. Not because you have had a parent that was a thief, but because we all have like things with our parents, and she's a daughter. So I think that's interesting about the second one.
Okay, we've got 10 minutes left, so we can reveal that and then ask other questions. The one that has sold and been produced is the first one, sports. For all the reasons you said, by the way. Sports is universal, major moments that captivate the world. People are at least familiar with some of these. Again, the familiarity. The second one hasn't gone yet. It's gotten a lot of interest. They're not sure if the archive in the story is strong enough because the story is older than someone robbing banks in the last 10 years. True crime tends to be 10 years old or younger. That's what they like. They want to feel like, you know, there but for the grace of God go I, right now. Compared to someone robbing banks 40 years ago, it's like, okay, it's safe now. I don't have to be afraid of the dark. You know, Satan's not in the next room turning over the furniture. You know, things like that.
We're still afraid of Jaws, though.
We are, you know, I wonder, though, you know, with people are so desensitized these days. I kind of wonder. I mean, the opening scene, of course, but we're going to need a bigger boat, I think. Yeah. Okay, we have 8.5 minutes.
So why not Titanic?
Oh, that's right. Same question. Yeah. And this was a flaw in my thinking. Thanks for reminding me. Titanic has come very close, but at several places, and it keeps getting eventually passed on because the comment is always the same. How are you going to show it? How, you know, like we used some AI in this. We borrowed some clips, and again, you know, they're not for broadcast, so you know, internally they're okay to use just as a sample. But the flaw in our thinking was we felt like these recordings were enough. Like, look what we have. Look at how good they are. These are the real people. You know, if we make the show, and I believe we will, we're going to have to keep reminding the audience, real person on the ship, because people will not get it. They'll think it's an actress or an actor. And so where we went wrong was just relying on the fact that we had discovered all of these great tapes from around the world. Other people that have done Titanic shows that might be chasing this stuff, they'll never catch us with the audio. They just won't. It'll take them a long, long time, and we already have it. But it's not been enough, because don't forget, this would make for a great podcast, which we may wind up doing, but TV executives, streamers, they look at it, you know, we are in a visual age. So what am I going to see? Yeah, this is cool. All these, this is amazing. Good for you for finding all this stuff. Now, how are you going to show it to me and keep it interesting? And so I kind of took it out maybe too soon because I didn't think it through. I mean, we've had suggestions from large streamers that maybe we should do it animated. We should make it like a cartoon. With, you know, are you going to like try and be James Cameron 2.0 documentary version when you'll never have enough money to do it? There's not enough archive with Titanic that was mentioned before. There's plenty with the Olympic, the sister ship. It's basically a cookie cutter of the Titanic, but it's not the same thing. In Los Angeles, we have a big ship that looks like the Titanic called the Queen Mary, which is in dry dock in Long Beach. We could fake a lot of stuff on there, but no one can, you know, and my flaw in the actual pitch, beyond just how the presentation was, is I would hear this. How are you going to show it? And my response would be, we'll show it however you want to show it. We have all these tapes. And they don't want to hear that. They want to see a vision. So when you're telling stories, regardless of, you know, whether you have great content or you have a great story to tell, they're interested in documentary storytelling as much in what they're going to see as what they're going to understand, hear, the journey they're going to be taken on. You need to tell them a visual story, and this Titanic thing is a perfect example. I thought you know, when we got to 100, I'm like, that's enough. We can stop looking.
You've also been at it a long time with the Titanic, and
Yes.
so, you know, those may be many generations of executives that you'd be pitching the same idea to. And also the need for persistence and determination and dedication over long periods of time, not just in terms of your production realities, but in terms of fighting for a vision that you have or for a project that you have. With a changing dynamic in an industry, within a changing dynamic of viewership. You know, you get to 7+ years, you're dealing with viewership that's changing and the demands
Absolutely. I
for
mean,
that.
the longest thing I worked on and pitched to get, and I finally sold, it took 14 years.
Yeah, that's a lot.
Other things have taken 10 to 12 years. Other things take 6 weeks.
Yeah.
So and you know, the ones that I feel most passionate about are obviously the ones that I stick to the longest because I want to make those things. The things that keep the lights on, as we say, are usually things like true crime or just, you know, travel shows, again, whatever they're buying. But they sell quick and we know how to make them. And in the meantime, I'm going to keep pushing the things that I really want to make.
We have a little bit of time left for some more questions. If there are any questions on any of the many things Tom's touched on or something perhaps he has yet to speak about.
So we talked about like the emotion and the story of the bank robber. When you're being a documentary storyteller, in some sense, you're like a journalist when you're going out and you're having these people tell their stories. Can you tell us a story of a time where you struggled with having someone be vulnerable enough to tell a story that needed to be heard and how you went about handling that?
Well, when I was a reporter, one of the worst assignments we would get is, you know, someone's son or daughter had been killed in some horrific way, and you'd have to go knock on the door of the family. And what I found is if your approach to them is heartfelt and you know, and being sincere, people will often want to talk with you because they find it cathartic to talk about what happened to a loved one. But you have to really mean it. You have to mean it not only when you meet them, but you have to mean it when you write the story. And it has to come through, and you have to make sure that some copy editor doesn't change it into something more salacious, which I've had to stop in the past. Not so much in docs, although we've had our share with that, but you know, people in the most vulnerable time of their lives. I mean, we did 60 episodes of something called Call 911. It was the first series that ID bought in the United States, Investigation Discovery, and we were sure it was 911 calls, and it was like 911 operators as heroes, but we never used a call unless the person who made that call agreed to be interviewed for the program. Because there have been other 911 shows where they just use the call. Because in the United States, 911 calls are in the public domain. So anyone can use them for anything. And it was from my journalism background when we sold that series, because I knew there was so much content there from people being in these extraordinary moments, you know, where their lives are changed. That, yeah, we can do all of this. For, you know, they asked me, well, how are you going to, you know, maybe 1 or 2 calls a day. I said, oh, no. Here's part of the pitch. I said, there are 500,000 calls to 911 every day in the United States. 500,000. I said, if you limit us to the last 10 years of 911 calls that we could use for this series, you could have 3 seasons. This is the moment it's sold. We could make 3 seasons of this series for you. 3 seasons using 1/10 of 1% of 1 day's 911 calls in the United States. And the guy sitting across, he said, "Say that again." And I said, 1/10 of 1% of 1 day's phone calls to 911 in the United States, you could have 3 years of a series. And you're talking we could use 10 years worth of calls. Yeah, they got it, and they bought 60 of them, so good for us.
Okay. We have time for one more question. 2, okay.
1 or 2, go.
Hi,
Yes.
Tom.
Hi,
Veronica McComb from Bryant University. I've heard you speak about the project that it took 14 years for you to, but you've mentioned it, but could you tell us a little bit more about what that project was and how you kept that persistence and belief in the project to finally get it? Yeah.
Well, it's another assassination of American president story. This one, Abraham Lincoln. For some reason, I was fascinated by the assassination of Lincoln. And my first job as a reporter was in Washington, D.C., and I found out that there was this place called the Mary Surratt Society in Washington, D.C. Mary Surratt was the first woman executed by the United States government. She was one of 4 co-conspirators in the Lincoln conspiracy, executed for her role. She had the townhouse in which the conspirators would meet in Washington, D.C. And the Mary Surratt Society exists today because they believe that Mary was wrongly hanged, and they want to keep her story alive. Plus, her boarding house, where Booth and David Harold, his accomplice, where they rode to outside of Washington that night, it still stands. And I found out when I was a reporter that they twice a year would have these bus tours that would follow the route of John Wilkes Booth and David Harold, the 2 that had gotten away, for 12 hours, a 12-hour bus tour through southern Maryland and into Virginia, 1 hour for each day that they were on the run. And with many of these places still there, and there's this idea of like, I'm walking in the same spot that they walked in. And so I wrote this newspaper article about the Mary Surratt Society, and they loved it because more people knew about it. And I said, somebody should make a film about this. And then years later, I start doing documentaries. I started pitching the Hunt for John Wilkes Booth. And couldn't sell it. I was told, too small a story. It's the very end of the Civil War. We already mentioned it. And I'm like, most people know Booth shot Lincoln in Ford's Theater, and then he took off, and a bunch of days later, they burned down the barn he was in and shot him, and he died. And that's it. And there's this amazing story between those 2 events. Couldn't sell it. Finally, this guy named James Swanson writes a book called Manhunt, which is basically the story. It becomes a bestseller. I got a call from one of the networks that said, remember that John Wilkes Booth thing? We'd like to do that now. That was 14 years after I first pitched it. And every couple of years, I bring it up and remind them, this is a great story. You're going to love this story. It's fascinating. And of course, they still show it to this day. And I made that a long time ago. And people love that story. It's fascinating because, again, it's part of a historical event that no one knows anything about. And when you learn about it, it's absolutely fascinating. We even interviewed, just as to make things feel current, you know, because that even at that time that was the mandate. We interviewed a current U.S. Marshal, whose job it was to hunt fugitives, and so he would do this constant compare and contrast about here's how they went after Booth, and here's how we do it now. You know, they didn't have social media, but you know, and he was great, and you know, a U.S. Marshal getting to comment on a manhunt for the killer of Abraham Lincoln. I mean, that's a little thinking outside the box, and it really worked well, and it made it feel more contemporary. So that was the one that took 14 years.
One more question, Joanna?
Hi, Tom.
Hey.
Bo Shugarts. I'm from Bryant University.
Yes.
I was wondering how, when you're working on all your projects, you know, you're multitasking. How do you keep your manage your time, but keep your place and pick back up whenever switching from each project, especially when they're different from each other?
Well, there's like an ebb and flow to the workflow. You know, you have to pay attention to things that need to be finished or delivered. At the same time, I mean, I try and carve out like, okay, if I'm busy doing a project that's been greenlit and moving forward, I'll try and at least do a half hour to an hour with people that help me with development, and I'll at least give them like marching orders, like, can you check this out? I have this idea of this. I read this headline. You know, I always joke that there's 25 documentaries every day in the New York Times, and they're not on the front page. They're buried in some story somewhere else. You know, a perfect example of that is Sebastian Junger, is a famous journalist documentarian. He wrote the book The Perfect Storm about the ship that went missing, the fishing boat that was turned into a movie with George Clooney. He tells the story where he was reading the New York Times about this boat. I forget the name of Andrea Gale. Was that what it was? And it was one of those little 1-inch blurbs on like a news around New England thing. And he clipped it out and he put it in his desk drawer. Again, where do stories come from? He was curious. He forgot about it. He was going through his drawer a year later, and you know, the blurb was about the ship boat. It was a fishing boat, was missing. And he thought, I wonder if they ever found that boat. And he found out they never found the boat. And then he went up to Gloucester to the bar where all the crew hung out, with a bar restaurant where their families went, befriended them all, started taking notes, wrote this book that took the world by storm called The Perfect Storm, which was then turned into a feature film, all because he clipped out this little 1-inch thing because it intrigued him. And he was curious, and he followed up by complete chance. If he had thrown that thing away, we wouldn't have that story. No one would know that story.
Well, in a classic move of show, don't tell, I think we now all have an understanding of why they call you Maestro.
Yeah.
So thank you so much, Tom, for your storytelling lesson.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.